being or with me being a teacher for the past year and a half. So just a little story. So a lot of my students, they go through lots and lots of things outside of the school that I couldn't, or me and you wouldn't even think of prior to me being a teacher, that I couldn't even imagine before. And they don't, it may have happened to them in the past, or they may go through things that are happening at the time that they're in school, like as in the night before or the day before or over break before coming to school. So I often have to grapple with them coming into my classroom and me having this, which I wanted to bring this book up. It's a book by Bettina Love, and it's called We Want to Do More Than Survive. And it talks about abolitionist teaching practices and just this pursuit for educational freedom. And it talks about how teachers of color are often in this, I think she calls it an educational survival complex, and where we try to teach students things like grit. So if you do fail something, don't give up. You need to still keep going, or teach them how to take standardized tests and teach them all these things to basically help them get ahead. And I go every day, and I feel like that is what majority of what I'm teaching them. I have them come into the classroom, and I expect them to listen to what I'm saying, and at times be silent, and be fully engaged in me talking about the American Revolution and me teaching them, and expect them to master this standard that I have to teach them. But meanwhile, they just, if the night before went through something so traumatic, how can I expect them to sit in a classroom after and do those things after that has happened to them?
Yes.
So I think that is why I feel like it's more so an effect on the students. So now there's been a big push recently, which I have been trying to transform my classroom, and our school has. It's something called trauma-informed teaching, or trauma-informed practices, or trauma-informed classroom. You're here, where basically your classroom or your teaching style takes into account the trauma that students have or have had in the past, and how does that affect them when coming to school. So it may be things like making sure that your classroom is a safe environment. So having as much as possible, creating a classroom environment where students don't have to be scared to be in the classroom. Because there's many schools where you could go to school, and my kids have said schools they've been to before, and they've been on lockdown multiple times because of fights or people bringing things into the school. So how can you create a school or a classroom where they feel safe, or things like giving them positive reinforcement, or taking into account they may not have gotten this paper done because last night something may have happened. Right. So how can you bend your whatever your system is because of that, because you're taking that into account. And also just giving them things like consistency that they may not have at home or in their environments outside of school. So with all that being said, I think it has a huge effect, but I think that it's just something. It doesn't mean that students who do experience trauma can't learn or can't be successful. I think it's, in order for them to be successful, teachers and schools need to take those things into account and not have just some solid, rigid system of educating them because these things happen. And I feel like that is the reason why the system of education that we have, or this traditional schooling, why that's never going to benefit children of color, because it hasn't taken that into account. So
no, you made it crystal clear to me. I will be having discussions on all of the videos that we do. I will unpack some of the videos we do at a later time. I'll put them online. You'll be able to see them, then we'll talk about them. And let me just tell you where I went to when you started talking about that. You mentioned that at one time in America it was against the law for blacks to read. And then what you described about the things that you, in the last year and a half, that you had to understand, that what kids can come to school and try to learn with what had happened at home. And what I think about is, I don't know you being young, but those of our audience members, if you would just put in your mind, think about the different movies that you've seen about slavery, or documentaries that you've talked about slavery, the beatings, the rape, the constant all-day work, the being scared, the diseases, the malnutrition. Just think if the kids that were in slavery had to get up every day and go to school and still be a slave child, how well would they have learned? Because they would have went through hell the night before, the morning of, when they get home, what they're waiting for. And that's what I thought about. You wouldn't ask somebody to learn in that type of environment. What I also thought about is when we discussed that gap. Because in the big house, little Sally, don't have to deal with none of that. When she gets up and go to work the next morning, she's well fed, she just had breakfast, she slept comfortably, she wasn't afraid, she did her homework, she's up and ready to go, and her hair's all done, and her clothes are new and fresh, and she's taking a shower. And then she sits in a class, and there's a teacher that looks just like her, that's also had a bath and had all these things, and eaten well and did all those things. Right. And I sit and look, and you test this child, and you test that child, and you think the result is supposed to be the same. Right. It's unimaginable that we can be such intelligent people and assume that that's what's going to happen.
Right.
And so
and it also makes me think of, like, when thinking of that achievement gap, which is also another way that I think, when I think about the achievement gap, why I don't necessarily think that fixing small things like changing reading programs and things like that, those small, I feel like, bandages, is because when you were explaining that, it made me think of, yes, all of those things that they go through, how can you expect them to come in and do those things? But we also need to look at all of those, why are all of those things happening?
Yes.
And a lot of it is the areas they live in, and the fact that they live in poor areas, or that their parents can't get ahead because of all of the other things going on, and just all the other systems, and just systemic racism in itself. So we also, which is why I said we need to look at the fact that just the system is racist.
Yes.
So therefore, we can't talk about these other things or closing these gaps if we don't look at the outside things that affect it, that has nothing to necessarily do with the classroom.
Yes. And again, so we're going to finish there, and we come back, we'll pick up there a little bit and go on to finish our questions. And I know you got to go, but we're going to have two-part to this interview. Okay. And if you be patient, we'll be right back. Be right back with you in a minute with Alyssa McIntyre.